on a U.S. Navy ship. The U.S. is holding two survivors of a U.S. strike on an alleged drug-filled submarine in the Caribbean. This according to President Trump. It would be the sixth known strike, the first that didn't kill everyone on board. In the same week, Trump publicly declared he authorized the CIA to operate inside Venezuela to crack down on drug trafficking and migrants. This afternoon, the president had this colorfully worded message for the Venezuelan strongman leader, Nicolas Maduro.
He's offered everything. You're right. You know why? Because he doesn't want to fuck around with the United States.
So joining us now is retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. I won't ask you about that language from the president, but I will be asking you about what the United States is doing. The U.S. Navy is deploying about 4,000 more Marines and sailors to patrol waters around Latin America and the Caribbean. Maduro is rolling out a new defense plan, reportedly mobilizing his own military, police, and militias. Could movements like this mean that both countries are preparing for potentially a larger conflict?
Yeah, Bianna, that unfortunately is often historically the case, that when countries mobilize their forces, here we have some Marines getting ready for a training mission, and here we have the Venezuelan National Guard, and they are moving into what looks like a training mission as well. So these are the kinds of things that we have to watch out for, because as troops deploy to areas, we've got about 4,000 U.S. troops in and around Venezuela right now. That could be a telltale sign that they're trying to do something. And once those wheels are set in motion, sometimes it's very hard to stop them.
So let's zoom out for a minute here, because Trump says Venezuela is, quote, feeling heat. Can you explain for our viewers why this focus specifically on Venezuela?
So there's several different factors here, Bianna, but one of them is Tren de Aragua. This is a group that President Trump talks a lot about. They started in Venezuela, but they are in many other places. They also operate here in the United States. One of the things that they do is very clearly and very badly human trafficking. They also do target migrants as part of that human tracking effort. Money laundering is also one of the key elements that they do. And probably most importantly to the U.S. administration is drug smuggling. So that's one aspect of it right there. Then you've got the military aspect. There are many air bases that the Venezuelans have, but these are two of the main ones, El Libertador and Lieutenant Teniente Vicente Landeeta Gil Air Force Base. They are in this part of Venezuela, and what they have are F-16s, American-made F-16s, and Russian-made Su-30s. So there is military power in Venezuela, and part of it is, of course, supported by Russia and also by Cuba. The other thing about Venezuela is they have oil, and one of the key elements of that is what is called the Orinoco Belt. There's several different factors here. Venezuela had a lot of oil in the Maracaibo region off to the west here, but they also have a lot of oil potentially in these parts. Plus, they also have a potential dispute with Guyana in the Essequibo region.
Yeah, it used to be one of the richest countries in the world, given their oil reserves. I do want to ask you and get your take on the head of the U.S. Southern Command stepping down. This is Admiral Alvin Halsey, who led operations in the Caribbean for only a year. And sources are telling CNN that he and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth did not see eye to eye. This is a high-profile resignation during an incredibly tense time, as you've just laid out. How unusual is that?
It is very unusual. Usually when tensions ramp up in a particular theater that is a theater of potential conflict, the person in charge of that combatant command, in this case Southern Command, would stay on in the job and see things through. But what is clear to me about Admiral Halsey stepping down is that there must be some policy disagreement going on here. And one of the key factors is that these attacks against the little ships that we've seen off the Venezuelan coast, they may not quite fit in with the construct of the laws of war. And that's a key factor and could have resulted in his early retirement.
All right. Colonel Cedric Leighton, thank you so much. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Bianna.
The military commander overseeing U.S. Southern Command and the Pentagon's escalating attacks on alleged drug boats off Venezuela's coast is retiring barely a year into his tenure. One source tells CNN tensions have been simmering for weeks between Admiral Alvin Halsey and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and that Hegseth did not believe the admiral was moving aggressively enough to take on alleged drug traffickers in the Caribbean. Today, according to Reuters, relatives of a Trinidadian man believed killed in the U.S. military strike on a boat in the Caribbean this week are demanding the U.S. provide evidence to back up President Trump's claim that those who died were trafficking drugs. Former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Admiral James Stavridis joins us now. He served himself as a commander of U.S. Southcom. He is also a partner at Carlyle Group, an international investment firm, and he serves on the board of advisors for a handful of defense-related companies. Thank you so much for being with us, Admiral. First off, just put this into context for us. How unusual is this, and why would a commander of Southcom retire well ahead of schedule in the midst of a controversial offensive of questionable legality?
It's very unusual. The last one I can think about was just under 20 years ago. That was Admiral Fox Fallon at U.S. Central Command. He had policy disagreements with the administration at the time about how to approach Iran. But for a combatant commander, normally he or she would be in the job 3 years minimum. I was 4 years as Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, 3 years Commander of Southern Command. So, Brianna, very unusual. I don't have any insight. I haven't talked to Admiral Halsey, but certainly one would think he would be considering whether he wanted to continue in the job. The Secretary of Defense might have decided he wasn't the right person in the job. We're just going to have to get more information, but it's a highly unusual situation.
Trump had said just a short time ago at the White House that this was a submarine that was struck in this latest case where someone survived. He said, "I don't know too many people who have subs." You have said that there is reason to worry about whether the Geneva Conventions are being adhered to with these strikes on alleged drug vessels. Why do you think the strikes might be illegal?
Well, let's start with the submarines. I'll tell you who do have submarines are drug runners. I captured any number of them when I was commander of Southern Command. They build these kind of primitive but somewhat effective semi-submersible, in effect, submarines. So it's not in any sense unusual to have one of those involved in the drug trafficking. I think it is also correct to say if it is a semi-submersible running through the Caribbean, that's almost a guarantee it is a drug runner. But here's the problem for the administration. They haven't provided any evidence to back up the claims that these drug runners are not only moving drugs toward the United States, but also are part of large organized entities that have a directed campaign against our nation. And their argument is that drugs kill Americans, therefore we kill drug traffickers. That has an attractive simplicity to it, but it doesn't in any way stand up unless you've got the intelligence. And finally, Brianna, this is where Congress ought to be involved because they can look at that classified information. They can help make a judgment as to whether these actions are legitimate under the laws of war and the Geneva Conventions or not.
What can you tell us just about Admiral Halsey? A lot of people aren't going to know who he is. They certainly are going to probably know who he is now.
Well, you can see he's African American. He is highly well regarded inside the U.S. Navy. He's a helicopter pilot. He's operated in combat. And I think most to the point here, before taking over U.S. Southern Command, he spent close to 3 years as the deputy of U.S. Southern Command. So he has deep, deep experience in the region. He enjoys a lot of respect from the Admiralty. And I think universally, we're sorry to see him step aside, whatever the reason is.
And, you know, he's only been a 4-star, an admiral, right, for about a year. So is that your understanding? He's actually giving up a star in retirement, and he goes back to being a vice admiral for the purposes not only of honorifics, but, you know, benefits, et cetera?
That'll be a decision for the Secretary of Defense. I think also the Senate gets a final call on that. So it's not certain, but as a general proposition, Brianna, you are correct. He would have had to serve normally 3 years in grade in order to accrue the benefits, the title of admiral, and a full admiral's retirement. That'll be a decision the Pentagon will have to make.
Yeah, I bring that up because it's a lot to give up. For people who don't know, it's a lot to give up if you're going to step aside. What broader questions for you is this raising about how the military is being utilized and how it might react to how it's being utilized by our civilian leaders?
The military as a group will always swear allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. They'll follow the Constitution, meaning they will obey legal orders, and I believe they will not obey illegal orders. Whenever an order is on the border, as a senior officer in particular, you always have the option of declining to obey it, put your stars on the table, and walk away.
Admiral James Stavridis, thank you so much for joining us on this very important story. We do appreciate it.